So when I was studying at RISD, one of the artists that I found was Piero della Francesca. He's an early Italian Renaissance artist from the 15th century. And when I first found out about his paintings, there's something that's very beautiful, but also like very odd, uncanny. To me, it had the similar qualities of artists like Magritte, De Chirico, Dali, these surrealist artists who make essentially like odd and uncanny artworks. But where I was surprised was that the surrealist movement happened in the modern time, right? Post-industrial. But this was early Renaissance, like right off the cusp of modernism. But I saw a similarity, some kind of through line, and that kind of sparked an interest in me. And upon digging deeper, I realized that Piero was not just a renowned artist, but he was also a celebrated mathematician. And he actually wrote a series theories and papers on geometry and linear perspective, and he actually provided a lot to the theories of linear perspective and geometry. And if you guys have a little bit of, when you guys look up like the difference of Renaissance art and medieval art, you can tell that artworks in the Renaissance art, and especially towards the end, compositions, figures, they start to become very realistic. The architecture becomes more realistic in terms of proportions, angles, and the people become more naturalistic. Versus when you look at artworks from the medieval time, they're more of icons. They look more like cartoons. Sometimes proportions are not as organic. And I would say that Piero actually provided a lot of contribution to that transition from what seems more symbolic and cartoonist to what is more naturalistic and realistic. And another thing that you guys have to realize is that before Renaissance art, a lot of people, there wasn't a distinction of art and craft, and actually everything was just considered as craft. Especially artworks or architecture for churches were a tool for a lot of different institutions like churches to create visual representation of the deity or the god that they were, or the religion that they were practicing. It was just really a tool to convey a visually express the theology that they were practicing to the common people. But in time, in conjunction with humanism, a type of philosophy that was really burgeoning at the time, artists start to wonder if they could add these philosophical ideas and mathematics into the artworks and the architectures that they were practicing. And Piero, in his theories, there are chapters like, for example, how to create a linear perspective, how to create geometry in linear perspective, and also how to draw organic forms in linear perspective. And these mathematics were one of their ways of practicing humanism and actually incorporating the rational ideas of humanism into visual arts. So what Piero did was not only did he make paintings, but in his studies as a pre-drawing, he calculated the exact contours of figures, the geometry, and the exact distances between object to geometry to architecture and more, to a point where this was a drawing that was done by Piero himself. After he created a masterpiece, he was actually able to reconstruct a three-dimensional space through the mathematics that was included in his two-dimensional painting. So that's to the point how exact his drawings and spaces were calculated. And my theory was that, and I started to realize where the through line of Piero and the surrealism may be. The thought is that because Piero calculated everything so precisely, so perfectly, but nothing is ever so perfect. So my theory was that Piero's work existed in that uncanny valley, the moment right before the perfection. And actually, what I was drawn to was not surrealism itself, but it was actually the uncanny. So ultimately, I was very fascinated as an undergraduate, and ultimately, not really knowing or having a specific direction yet in my studio practice, I set out to copy Piero because I thought copying is one of the best ways to learn. But then one of the biggest problem was that to copy him, I had to do complicated mathematics, and I just wasn't good at math. But I saw that there were tools available. In history, you have linear perspective, there's camera obscura, camera itself, there are different ways to project, print, trace. And I started to see that to me, I actually had the computer accessible, and within the computer, I had access to 3D modeling programs, the types of program that you use to create, like Disney Pixar movies or things like that. And without actually doing the math myself, I can actually work with the computer where the computer figures out the mathematics, and I can actually utilize this tool to have a similar effect of what Piero did in his pre-drawings. So this is one of the renderings that I created for one of my paintings. But similar to Piero's works, I have the two-dimensional visual of what's going to be the painting, but at the same time, I'm aware of like various details. Like I'm fully aware of the space. And so once I figure out the 3D modeling part of this process that I was developing, the next issue was, well, okay, like I learned to make image in the digital space, but ultimately what I wanted to do was to make physical paintings, right? It's not that digital images are more or less than paintings, but my original intention was to make a painting, and this digital tool was in service of a larger idea that I want to do. So while figuring out which method to bring out the digital to the physical, I went back to the source, and I started to look at how Renaissance frescoes were made. And frescoes are like artworks that are like embedded into plaster walls. And what made it very difficult was that you weren't able to just paint on top of the wall, because if you do that, then because of weathering and other elements, paintings will just disappear right away. So there was a very unique and difficult process where the artists could only insert the pigment while the plaster was wet. That way, the pigment would be infused with the plaster wall, and it would literally become the wall itself. But the difficulty with that was that plaster dries relatively quickly, so also you can only work in small areas at a time, and yet also the artist had to work relatively quickly. For example, like the Sistine Chapel in Italy is a version of fresco, and this is a work by Raphael. So what these artists used to do, because they weren't able to figure out the painting on the site, they made cartoons or cartones, which were life-size renderings of it's like one-to-one scale to what they would be making, but they were able to work on this in the comfort of their studio. So they were able to take as long as they needed, figure it out, and once the renderings or the cartoons were ready, they would bring it to the actual fresco site, and then put it up by the wall, paste it, poke holes. So they would actually poke holes and where the outlines are, pour charcoal through the holes, pounce it, and that way you get the traced lines on the walls. And then from there on, all they had to figure out was just coloring in. It was literally paint by numbers kind of thing. I was very fascinated with this method. So, and knowing that they had their version of transferring technique, I was looking at what kind of transfers I could have. And working with the computer, I arrived upon inkjet transfers. So what that is that when something is printed on a piece of paper, the ink is attached to the paper, yes? But when there is a surface of glue or adhesive, and you paste the print upside down, and when the glue dries completely, you can actually rub the paper off with a little bit of water, sponge, and sandpaper. And the paper, you can completely remove the paper, but the ink will remain on the glue surface. So what I started to do was like once the renderings of the artwork was done, I would print it, and then I would add glue on top of the canvas surface, and then once it's dry, I would rub it off, and then additionally adding layers of glue that was used to do the transfer. I would build additional surfaces and made it archival, and then once the glue layers are done, then I would start to paint with oil. It's very complicated, but you have to know that this process is something that I have been developing since 2013, and I'm able to kind of let you know all the processes right now. But it has been this long journey of literally figuring one thing out and then learning that there are other things I have to figure out. So it was really a series of problem solving, creative problem solving, and then. And going back to 2013, at the time I was reading about, what was it called? Minimalism and theatricality. Theatricality in art history, it's like a movement that really recognizes the viewer. So when it means to be theatrical in relevance to art history, a lot of the times, artists would be making artworks in service for themselves as their extension of, as their way of expressing themselves. And this was really heightened during abstract expressionism with Rothko, Pollock, and individuals like that. But when you go to local museums like Die Beacon and see minimalist works, you might be confused because you see a lot of random boxes and things on the wall. But what minimalism as a theory, as a practice really wanted to achieve was to activate a space that you were standing inside. So what minimalism thought about art was not just the object itself, but the space that it can activate. And therefore you as an audience become part of the experience. And I don't know if you guys were studying about postmodernism or this deconstruction in writing and stuff, but postmodernist writings often think about not just the writer, but actually the readers. They consider the reader's experience because they believe that the book starts with the author, but it ends with the reader's experience kind of stuff. And that kind of idea also translates into art history and through minimalism. So I was fascinated with this idea, and I kind of wanted to create a painting that activates the viewer, but without necessarily painting a person. So I decided my first inkjet transfer painting to be a giant painting of a theater seat. And the idea was that by creating a really big painting of a theater seat, when you as a viewer are standing in front of it, you are watching the seats watch you. So in a way, you become the dancer, you become the performer of the painting, and actually the painting is there only to activate you, kind of thing. And And the inkjet transfer and the computer rendering came in at the right time because I ultimately wanted to create like an accurate, believable space. So that's where it started. And and then while I was still at RISD, I was kind of experimenting with it. And right after I graduated in 2016, I think several things were happening at the same time. Like one, like I graduated and moved to New York, so I was also working at a restaurant. So there was my time, like the time I had available to my studio was very limited. So I really had to like focus on like one strain of idea that that I wanted to develop, not necessarily because you have to pick one or the other, but more because of just the constraint of time. And another thing that I was at the time struggling through was actually, I think this is around the time when it was like, I think it was like Hillary Clinton and Trump election time. And my background in like I also had a minor in philosophy at RISD, and one of the things I was really focused in was actually like writings on like, ideologies. So as an extension, like my research went into a lot of like Marxist theories, but also like on the more contemporary side, like Slavoj Žižek, but also like looking at like Lacan and like Freud, and ultimately like I saw with the election that was happening, I was seeing that more and more as time flowed, there was only one reality, but there were such a polar opposite ways of seeing the same reality, right? And to me, this was like, and to me, like, a lot of the things that were happening in that time was like, that was actually a symptom of a larger fundamental problem that we were facing as a generation. So I had these two things that I want to do, right? One is to continue this practice of theatrical inkjet transfer paintings, but also find a way to like address some of the things that were happening in the contemporary time. And I think as an extension of the philosophy that I was studying, I saw that we are only able to see the world through prescriptive languages that these like ideas of power or institutions put forth, but we can't see the object itself, or like it's hard for us to see actually what's happening. So I know it's a lot of context, but so I think for my gut reaction, this painting of a concession stand. It's something that I started to make. I was working with I had a weird analogy to describe what I thought was humanity, and I start to see that like people are like snowflakes, like conceptually we know that each snowflake has a crystalline shape that makes each snowflake unique, but optically we're only able to see snow in groups and collectives and mounds. And similar to that, popcorns were, I think, I was like really trying to figure out like, what can I do with theaters? But come on. And I saw that popcorns are in a way similar. Once the popcorn explodes from the kernel, every popcorn has a unique shape. But do we ever like pick up one popcorn and like, wow, that's a nice popcorn? We don't do that, Like we also see these as mounds. We consume them as mounds. So I thought popcorn was actually a good analogy to describe what people are, similar to snowflakes. So this it's kind of idiotic, but on the top of the concession stand where the menu is, I created total 72 variations of individual popcorns, and I laid them all out on the top so that you can see all popcorns individually. And I also created these like popcorn combo paintings so that in the concession stand painting, you can see the popcorns individually. And in the popcorn combo paintings, you can only see the popcorns as groups to kind of describe both the qualitative and quantitative way of seeing an identity. This was my first show in New York. I believe it was 2018 at Sotheby's Institute. So they have like an art program. If there's anyone who's interested in like going into the more art administrative or marketing side, and they had a program where they were inviting emerging artists to exhibit. And at the same time, I created a counterpart to the theater seat painting. So I made because I had the theater seats, I made a theater screen. But what I was able to do with it, the way I installed it, I actually had them freestanding and facing each other. So that you as an audience, and because of the size of the panels, like they were, when they were facing each other, they almost created a theatrical space. And so that you as an audience can exist in the in-between, right? To me, abstractly or metaphorically, the paintings were a metaphor for like the opposite ends of the spectrum. And I thought the world that exists is like not always, it's like, I think like any like prescriptive or dogmatic language or description is, it is useful and necessary because it's a very convenient way of like charting or mapping like some of the elements in the world. But at the same time, sometimes like because of how like ideas of power like to spin their narratives, especially as like social media and our society, evolves today, it becomes harder and harder to see the gray areas between the black and the white. And I really wanted to just activate the in-between. And that's how this series was completed. And then many years after, I had a really big exhibition at Chelsea at Harper's Gallery. And something that has been developing is that the works started more so black and white, and eventually I was trying to figure out how to add more life and light into these works. I think about a year before this show, I had a very tragic incident in my family. I won't go into the details of it, but it was a very difficult time for my family, and I just wanted, at the time, I wanted to find something that spoke about mortality and life and death in a more constructive way, just so that I can reason with it. And something that I came across again was Dante's Divine Comedy. It was something that I briefly passed by while I was at school, but because I had the book in my library, I just decided to pick it up and read again. And something that I found most interesting was actually the orientation of Dante and the pilgrim's journey. So when they're venturing down the Inferno, when they're venturing down the Inferno, they're always walking in the direction of the left, because like left symbolically means the opposite of right and the world above. So the journey down the Inferno or hell was always in the direction of the left. And in contrast, in the second section, when they enter purgatory, the first thing that Dante does is to look to the right on a day of Easter Sunday, which is a day of rebirth. And from that point on, their journey always is in the orientation of the right. And another topic that I found very important was Dante's theme on the idea of choice. Dante ultimately thought that for us to be human, it was necessary to choose. Because when you choose, you have agency, and it requires you to do something about your reality. And to him, one of the biggest sins were actually not choosing and being complacent. So where the Inferno had no choice and everyone was just like eternally suffering, also in the direction of the left, in Purgatory, what was very different was that Purgatory was not just a place of another eternal damnation, but it was actually a place of choice. Left alone, it's a place where you will, just be there for God knows how long. But if you chose, it was a place where you can choose to learn about who you are, and it was a place where you can choose to repent, or in a less religious term, it was a place where you can choose to find redemption so that you can prepare yourself for a better realm. And to me, like it was very moving for me, and I wanted to capture this in my painting, but also like not in a way that's like too like, I don't know, like too like, I don't want it to be too prescriptive. I want it to be experiential, right? I didn't necessarily need you to know everything about the allegory or the concept, but I wanted to capture the essence of this great thing that I found. So what I decided to do was I created a carousel with exactly 31 horses, 31 referencing the day in a month, and these horses are facing in the direction of the left, towards the inferno. But if you, as the audiences, chose to imagine the carousel rotating, then the horses will eventually rotate because just of the nature of the mechanism, and get to the other side and look to the right. And for every horse depicted in the painting, I chose 31 stories that I thought were representative of in-between spaces or purgatories, coming from like historical narratives, books, movies, personal experiences. And ultimately, the carousel became an index of 31 stories that were representative of the everyday life. And then each of the individual paintings were, in a way, these were like people stuck in between spaces, but by utilizing these symbolic gestures like arches, like golden light, halos, and things like that, I was able to, in a way, like bring these prisoners redemption. And then after accomplishing this, do you have enough time? Okay. And in the same year, I had another solo exhibition in Los Angeles. And because I have already worked with, I don't know, in a way, like the Inferno and the Purgatory, I think my natural instinct was to think about what does heaven look like for this body of work, right? And I decided to work with the idea of garden because in classical mythology and classical texts, gardens were actually almost like it was actually like a device that like on surface level were peaceful and happy, but actually it was a domain and parts of the book where your heroes will lay down their arms and become actually vulnerable. So it was almost a calm before the storm kind of thing. So whether it's Hercules, Odysseys, or in more contemporary books like Alice in Wonderland, or even or if you want to go more biblical, like Garden of Eden, like there's always this idea of garden, where there's this idea of peace before everything goes wrong, kind of thing. And I continue to work with this idea of like installation to, to convey a more complicated narrative if I could. So for this body of work, I actually wrote a short narrative based on the idea of Christ, not the metaphysical one, but the more historical. So for example, like here, like in the garden, a monster appears, and the monster kind of looks like a manticore. I forget the name of the author. It's Jane something, but she writes about pantheology, and she was actually talking about how like monsters like Frankenstein and manticores are better representation of humans in comparison to singular idea of gods and deities, because especially in our contemporary times, like I'm not just Korean, I'm not just American, but like and like a lot of who I am comes from so many different sources, and that like Frankenstein, who I am internally is a pistache, or it's a collage of a lot of different ideas and cultures, and that a singular idea of a perfect being is too prescriptive and cannot represent a person whole. So, so a monster appears in a garden, and then with the presence of the monster, there's peace in the garden. And but then there are already these like eagle people who are residing in this like garden world, and they're not happy with the presence of this new figure, and they ultimately persecute this figure and then execute him, right? And and on the other side, I created a really big painting. I don't know if you can see the scale. It's about like 14 foot wide, so I think it is like the size of this wall. And on this and this is a painting of a ruin with 5 fresco paintings. So it's like a painting with paintings within a painting, and there's and then each fresco refer to each of the individual smaller painting. And you can see that by the number of figures and the overall composition, all the scenes are 1-to-1, except for the last piece. Whereas in the individual painting, it shows the power figures, or like the eagle people, killing the monster. In the fresco, which I thought is more ideological, you see the eagle people embracing the monster. And in this way, I was hoping that it would kind of like reflect on how the Romans originally persecuted Christ, but eventually adopted the idea of Christhood as their symbol, right, for their reasons. I'll get to this later, but and not only that, and like the biggest purpose for me, similar to the theater seats, was to actually not just conceptually but optically, visually put the audience between 2 versions of the same narrative, right? So like there are many cases like that in our times, like for example, like many stories by Brothers Grimm are reinterpreted by Disney in a very child-friendly way, but also politics too. Like whatever happens, like there are always like different interpretations and different versions of the narrative, and like for me, I think like who I am as an artist and a person, it's never really about like providing you with like a singular answer, but like I think what I want to do with my painting is to just like really situate you in a way so that you can just see how things are developed and how narratives change. And I think, and this show is called Ode to Joy, based on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And if you go here, I don't know if you can see, but there's a little record player. There's a vinyl with Beethoven's face on it. And what was fascinating for me was that actually Ode to Joy was, not only was it a classical masterpiece, but historically it has been embraced by many various ideas of power. For example, it is still a United Nations unofficial anthem, but it's also the song that Hitler really appreciated and celebrated his conquest with. The Soviet thought that Beethoven was brother's man, and like Ode to Joy was another anthem that they used through their marches and things. During communist revolution, this was one of the unique Western ideas that were not censored. And in interviews by many different dictators and leaders, they said Ode to Joy to be their favorite song. And similarly, eagles too are a symbol like that. For example, in Greek mythology, eagle is symbol of Zeus, like the king of gods. You also find the eagle on the Great Seal of America on your coins and your dollar bills and your like government-related forms, but also you see a eagle on top of a swastika, and also in many Eastern European sigils and symbols, you also find eagle. In Korea, also like on top of the police badge, you'll find an eagle. So I saw similarity of eagle and Beethoven, and that's why like the eagle people became this idea of power in the story. And the third part of this exhibition had these stone paintings where each verses of the lyrics to Ode to Joy were engraved into the works. And I won't go into too much detail with this, but I think here I start to figure out how to like work with like not just the paintings, but actually to curate as an installation, right? And then slowly I was really just figuring out how I can paint more enthusiastically. I'll just go over this. This was a body of work based on the movie Castaway, but I think underneath it, it was really based on Moby Dick. Because like in the book, they are chasing Moby Dick, and this idea of a whale, which also I think like allegorically represents God in the book. And also like I'm not religious, I'm just like very interested in this kind of thing because I think religion is a type of ideology, and it is something that we humans really like have lived with for centuries and still now. So this painting, although the titles are quite crazy, but one is called God and the other is Death of God, because I start to see that like I think like us living in the coasts, we're hesitant to see that like we've kind of like outgrown religion, at least in the coastal areas, and I think we only have, many of us like have like big negative connotations because, especially if you read history, is like religion always have been reasons for conquest, to dominate, but at the same time there's still like a very humanistic. There's very there are reasons why we can't live without it, like especially like although I'm not like, my mom is very religious, and like at times like it does help, like because like for most of us like for some of us religion can be a guiding light. It can be a reason to live. It can provide you with a sense of purpose. However, like if it's practiced too obtrusively, like a lot of negative things can happen. But on the other side, like Nietzsche wrote, like God is dead, but the thing is, like although we have been living without God, we still live very religiously, right? Whether it's news, whether it's K-pop, or whether it's a lot of like reels or things that you're interested in, even without the presence of God, people still live very religiously, if you get what I mean. Like we have idols, we have icons. But the thing is, like without not God, but without something to actually be passionate about, to live without a goal or something that you love, life can become very monotonous, right? And that's when you really feel like you're stuck in a place, that you're living in a purgatory. So again, like I think with these two centerpieces, I wanted to create a spectrum where you have to kind of like balance, right? Between the absolute world of God and then the other absolute world without religion, right? And then more recently, I think the paintings are becoming more subtle, open, and I'm just ever so experimenting and just learning how to paint better. And then different ways of making textures with the materials that I'm already using. And then, and I've been starting to like figure out, like I learned how to create complicated concepts and installations like as a body of work. And I've been kind of like going back to the individual works to see how the individual works can also be as complicated. So one of the ways that this is a rendering of the painting that I finished. So while it may look as it is, what it is actually I have created 3 different perspectives of the same scene and found a way to merge it so that when you look at it on an initial view, it may look acceptable, realistic, but you're actually looking at you're actually looking at multiple perspectives at once. Okay. You guys okay so far? Yeah? All right. So while I have been developing my artist career and my studio practice, something that I've also been passionately working on and developing is Civil Art, which is a nonprofit organization that I founded. And it's actually an organization that I founded similar to when my first major exhibitions started to happen. So in a way, for me, like studio and civil art have been growing simultaneously. And I think to provide context to how the first project came together, when I was studying at RISD, I loved being in classrooms because by reading about different artists, philosophers, and writers, I saw how people came together and essentially were able to change how people saw the world, and the world followed. However, outside of the classroom, the reality was very different for me. I was someone who grew up with a lot of constraints or restraints, and as an emerging artist who was also Asian American, I needed a lot of support, grants, resources, but these were things that were very hard to find, especially I think like 10, 20 years ago. And I've been living with this sense of void for a very long time. And when COVID hit, I think like this void it became superimposed again, especially with a lot of the elders, and I think with generations of invisibility and unawareness in times of crisis. Like I think there's always an instinct to hate people who we consider as others, right? So, and I also realized that like a lot of the feelings that I had, I thought it was like really like just me for a long time, but I realized that these feelings of neglect, invisibility, stuff like that was actually a shared experience. And so at the time I knew a few people at Christie's, which is a really big, it's like one of the world's biggest auction houses. And I wrote him a cold pitch. I was like, I know you guys have a corporate social responsibility, an EDA&I program, and I know that previously you have done different charitable exhibitions. So I thought I wrote a cold pitch saying, hey, I think we can produce one for my Asian American community. And miraculously, it got accepted. And what really started from absolutely nothing became a charitable exhibition where we raised over $250,000. And half of it we donated to Heart of Dinner, which is a local nonprofit organization that combats food insecurity of elderly Asian American families. But also, and the other half I donated to participating artists so that it would support their time during the difficulty of COVID. And with the success of the show called At the Table, I saw that actually a lot of people, artists, but also like people in the industry, are actually willing to support through like either in service or donations, and and um, and that's when me and the few key collaborators of the exhibition decided to come together and start a nonprofit. And Civil Art originally started as a exhibition and event-based organization, but I think while I was like learning how to actually run a nonprofit, one of my someone asked me like who suffers if civil art doesn't exist, right? He was really asking about he was just for context, he was someone who was very experienced in the philanthropy and nonprofit world, and it was almost like a good question to kind of like guide me to really think about what an organization can do for people. And I think what he was noting at the time was beyond uplifting, beyond awareness, like how are your resources actually changing the lives of people? And I think in 2022, I didn't really have a way of answering that, right? Because yes, like we're doing these good initiatives, we're like sharing these narratives, and yes, like I think in like the long institutional change, like long historical thought, maybe these can really change perspectives and how my community is seen. But at the same time, like how necessary is it in that if we were to disappear, are people going to have less of an opportunity, less of a resource? And that was something that I struggled with. And I think since 2022, that's something that I've been slowly working on. So ultimately, like where we are today is that Civil Art, we have two overall programs. One is professional pipeline program and incubators, and the other is community platforms. I'll skip around some. So our professional pipeline programs, we have two that's ongoing right now, with the third developing for next year. One that we have is Art House, which is an emerging artist incubator program. And this is a program that is catered to recently graduated Asian Pacific Islander artists. And what it aims to do is to really be a bridge so that the students can actually be more accustomed to and find success post-graduation. Because one of the hardest things for art is that like it takes a long time, right? And oftentimes, if you come from a lot of resources, you have the means to survive that long until you find a way in. But what I realized is that some of the hardest thing for things like COVID and the recent economic disturbancy was that in these moments of humps, people who don't have as much resources sometimes have to close the book on their like passionate chapters, and unfortunately have to move to something else because like when you're unable to pay for your studio, when you're not able to pay for your meal, like how are you supposed to pay for studio? Because like most of the times, artists have to pay for both studio and a home on top of the materials, and so like it's essentially a program that is really built to really support people based on their merits, so that people who have talent, we have a way of creating a pipeline, and so that they can really arrive at these opportunities much more quicker. So the programs, we have a lot of networking and community building events, but something that's very special for us is that we have a lot of professional development and workshops. So like, not so much for like how to like make paintings and stuff, which are well taught in various schools, but what we focus on is actually providing like industry knowledge. So like one of our board member is a partner at a law firm, so she's providing a workshop on like best practices on legal for artists. We have things from bankers going over like how to set up LLC, how to do budgeting, ledger, things like that. We have galleries actually speaking to artists about like what is an artist gallery relationship, like what to expect, like what are some tips and tricks to actually have some of the galleries come back and then actually have these relationships lead to actual opportunities. I've also provided things like artist toolkits where there's like a lot of things like newsletter, professional emails, and a lot of other nitty-gritty stuff that really helps with the profession. And also a grant writer teaching like what are some of the best tricks to actually write grants and keep up with grant cycles. And there's also exhibition opportunities included. And we're actually opening up a group exhibition in Tribeca December 17th. So I'll let Darius know, but you guys should come by. And we're actually hosting a fun white elephant book exchange thing. So like anyone can come, anyone can be part of it. Just bring a book that's meaningful to you. It can be from your library, you can buy it from a store, but bring a book that's meaningful to you and add a little note so that people know who it's from, and it'll be like a fun, lighthearted but sweet community program. And then we have college internships. So I mean, if you guys are ever interested in, especially if you are working in marketing or interested in working in the art field, not so much as an artist, but like in the administrative, marketing, and gallery directing side, I urge you to actually apply for college internships because we work on a lot of projects, for example, like with Rockefeller Center, different galleries, so it's really designed so that you are like, the interns are actually working on these like milestone projects. Because another thing that I realize is that so many people are talented, but they're not always given a chance to actually prove like their skills. So like we thought that actually by working together on these really major projects, you guys can have a very significant things in your portfolio, which will really help which will really help with your future applications. Because hopefully through us, you will really stand out, kind of thing. We have worked with over 130 artists since 2022. These are some of the organizations. And we also have our community platform where we continue to put together exhibitions, and we are also publishing books and articles. And the reason why I'm calling it community platform, because like these art events, I realized that they can actually become a platform or an entry point or a catalyst to actually use it as ways of fundraising so that we can actually donate to other local nonprofits. Or they can also be a platform where we can not just the art industry, but actually open it up to public so that people can come and see like a lot of different talents and their cultural stories. But it's also a place for education, because we have been partnering with a lot of local youth organizations for them to bring a group of students so that we can actually give them an educational walkthrough and actually show that, you know, like their future is not just in, you know, like law and doctorate and stuff, but that actually like people who look like them are succeeding in various parts of the creative world and are, you know, like shaping how things are seen. So that's civil art. Yeah, and I think that's the presentation.
Do you guys have any questions for OJ?
Yes.
How do you stay inspired as an artist, and whenever you have moments of stillness or burnout, how do you cope with that and navigate around it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do get burned out. Less now, but it might sound like cheesy, but like being kind to yourself is very hard, and that's actually something that I've had to learn, like consciously over time. So like Actually, like, how do I answer that? I don't know.
Or like, where do you find most of your inspiration?
Oh, inspirations?
Is it like more personal, or whenever you're trying to create something new, like where do you go?
I mean, like, a lot of my inspirations come from the books that I read. Not only because like they're interesting stories, but the way I see paintings, or like the types of painting that I want to make, I see them as books, because because like when someone writes a book, an author will start from his or her personal stories as a point of departure, but ultimately they write in a way that's approachable to more people than not. And so for me, like what books are really good at is that it balances both the personal and the universal. Like even if it's in reference to histories or something that's more universal, it always starts from the author's point of view and the author's interpretation. And so like it does always start from the author's POV or experience, but it's written in a way where like it's not just for the author, but it's actually something that's enjoyable to people who are willing to invest time into it, right? And I think just like so like reading, but I also have this like through line or this like overall idea of like wanting to like just represent the world that I see in this in between space. So especially if I come across books or movies that are more representative of the overall theme, then I think like they just happen to kind of like linger in my head. But I think it's important to just like see a lot, like see as much as you can, read as much as you can, because like Lucian Freud, like he used to consider going to the museum like going to the doctor, because like sometimes like he'd be in the studio like working on something and he'd be really stuck, and he would just go to the museum and actually see how his older masters used to do things, and sometimes he would find an answer from that, right? And another thing is one of the advice is that I think a lot of like, especially when you're young, you always want to like be original and new. But if you think about it, there's never anything that's like truly original, right? Like for example, like a Korean restaurant, for example, can create a brand new dish and it's relatively original, but it is still in reference to other dishes that have been made, right? And even the best stories that we even the best movies we watch today, like if you look closely, like oftentimes they are referencing different stories or different allegories. So I think in the process of copying, like if you do it for the right reasons, you actually learn more about yourself, because I think something that's important is that I think like whether it's Darius's class or other electives, but like there will be moments when you are more inclined to look into something compared to other things. And I would suggest you to actually look closer to that, right? Because everyone's very different, but there may be a more fundamental reason for why you are more attracted to something, right? For me, like I think like when I was in high school, I really liked movies like Matrix and like things like that. And it was actually one of my professors who kind of like showed me Slavoj Žižek and actually showed me how Matrix was actually a novel. And then actually like these are books that were actually talking about these societal ideological problems. And so like I would say like lean into what you already like, but then like not just read it on the surface level, but research like actually like who the author is and actually when it was written and like what societal things that they were considering in the time that stuff were written.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, give Jae, Brian, and Arvin a round of applause.